Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thanks so much for joining us for this latest iteration of Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Services and the Human Trafficking Prevention Project's quarterly webinar series. My name is Heather Heiman, and I am one of your presenters today, and I'm here with my colleague, Sylvia Gorgon, who is MVLS's workforce, one of our workforce paralegals, who has vast experience in the realm of expungement. And we are excited to be talking to you today about some of the expungement law changes that occurred during this year's General Assembly session. So you can say hello, Sylvia, and then I'll do a little housekeeping and then we'll get going.
Hi, as Heather mentioned, I'm Sylvia Gorgon. I'm the Workforce Development Paralegal at Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Services. Um, I mainly deal with expungements, so this is kind of right up my alley, and has been affecting a lot of my clients recently. So I'm excited to get to share some new information on it.
Great. Yeah, we're really excited to chat with you all today. I see there's a bunch of people still joining. There's a lot of interest in this webinar, which is great. It is being recorded. And if anyone needs to use closed captioning, they can. We're happy to field questions during the course of our discussion today. We ask that you use the chat to ask questions. And it's a pretty short webinar, actually. There's been some great changes, but it's not crazy extensive. So we'll be reviewing the changes and happy to answer questions. You can always reach out to us after as well. So I will let Sylvia jump in here to get started with the some of the most exciting news that came out of this year's General Assembly session.
Right, so the big change to expungement this year is what's being called, I guess, the governor's bill, which is a three-part bill. Um, it overturns a ruling that is referred to as the Abhishek ruling, which in a lot of cases prevented people from getting expungements if they had an unsatisfactory completion of their probation or parole, which can happen for a lot of reasons. It can be a technical violation. It can happen because you were charged with another crime. It could happen because you didn't pay for anything. And so people would they would be on probation, they would be on parole. They may or may not violate that. And then even though that they would either continue their probation or consequently be incarcerated for it and then complete their incarceration, that charge was never eligible for expungement under the Abhishek ruling. Um, so the result was a lot of people who should be getting expungements weren't getting expungements because of this one particular interpretation of a law, um, really revolving just around the word satisfy in terms of the expungements.
Yeah, and that term satisfy was it's really nebulous in a way, and it was open to interpretation. In this ruling, the court did such a narrow interpretation of what that meant. So,
Yeah, so like Heather was saying, it was a really narrow interpretation of it. It was really up to the courts to figure out what was satisfactory and what wasn't. And yeah, like I was saying, the your violation isn't always just like a new crime. So sometimes people would have a technical violation. A lot of times, one of your contingencies for probation is that your license is suspended, but you're also required to pay probation fees, and you're also required to show up to meetings. But if the courts are taking away your license and you're supposed to pay all these fees, but you can't get to work because you don't have a car anymore, or you're supposed to go to these meetings, but you can't get there because you don't have a car anymore, you could just automatically have your probation violated for missing one of these meetings or not paying the right fines on time. So it affected a lot of people in a way that it really shouldn't have. And so this governor's bill really aimed to overturn that ruling and have a broader interpretation of what satisfactory was.
mhm. Yeah, and I'm sure Sylvia, like the examples you're sharing right now, I know with the Human Trafficking Prevention Project partnership, like we were seeing people that would miss the bus, right, and miss their
Hmm.
appointment, and that would be cause a violation of their probation. And we were having to do so much more research too into like were things closed satisfactorily, unsatisfactorily. We had to get court records. It was just throwing up barrier after barrier to people understanding whether they were eligible under
Hmm.
Abhishek and causing a lot of folks to just kind of feel like it wasn't worth it. You know what I mean? Like they didn't know if they were going to be able to get expungement under this ruling. I don't know if you were seeing that too in the workforce program.
Yeah, definitely. And both the clients and our attorneys, the ruling was so confusing and there's such a narrow, like anything, if you had a violation of probation, it was still possible to get an expungement on that case, but it had to go through, like you had to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to make sure that it was actually eligible or not. And a lot of clients were just didn't feel like doing that. A lot of attorneys thought it was too much work to be able
Mhm.
to go through with that. So they would just, if it had a violation of probation, they would skip over it immediately.
Yeah, we saw the same thing. And it was so disheartening because again, expungement is there. We don't want people's records following them around, especially if they
Hmm.
completed, most of these folks had completed their probation, had completed all the sentences imposed by the court. And it was just these challenges they were facing during that process that led to this kind of ambiguous outcome, or questions. And then they didn't think they were able to get this remedy. So.
Hmm. Exactly. So like I was mentioning, the Expungement Reform Act of 2025, which is what it's technically called. But since it was put forth by the governor's office and subsequently backed by the governor's office, it's being
Thank you, Governor.
also, yeah, thank you, Governor. It's also being
Very
called the
grateful for
governor's
that.
bill. Um, and it was a three-part bill. The first part aims to override the Abhishek decision, which opens up a lot of new avenues for expungement, where any violation of probation um, was not being filed for is now eligible again after October 1st. It adds three new eligible convictions, which are traffic violation of driving without a license, cashing a bad check, or using a stolen credit card. And then it also hides stets as well as all of the cannabis offenses that were also pardoned by the governor from case search in 2026. And I just wanted to note that talking about like having your license suspended in terms of violating probation, driving without a license being an eligible conviction is a huge deal this year. It's not only is something that we see a lot at MVLS of people having and it blocking a lot of their expungements, but it's also just another way to like criminalize poverty in a way because it was a way for you to have something on your record that can just never go away. And then consequently, because you didn't have your license and it was suspended, you would not be able to show up to job interviews. You wouldn't be able to get to work. If you did get a job, people would see it on your record and you might be barred from housing because of it. So really driving without a license is a huge addition that we're really happy to see this year.
I have to echo that too for our clients with the HTPP partnership. We saw the same thing. I had numerous clients who had prior eligible records that could potentially be expunged block by convictions for driving without a license. And often there were lots of extenuating circumstances why that may have occurred, and it was trapping them in this precarious place. So this is
Hmm.
something to be so excited about. And we're going to be going back through our clients and kind of looking at who we need to notify and connect with to let them know that now this is something that's eligible. And for many folks, it's going to allow them to expunge a number of additional records as well, which is great.
So this slide talks about the specifics of the overriding the Abhishek ruling. They're changing the definition of completing the sentence, which now it's meaning the time when a sentence is expired, including any period of probation, parole, or mandatory supervision. Um, it's theoretically still up to the courts how they want to interpret this, but it leaves much more room to have a violation of probation still be completed satisfactory.
Mhm.
Um, and another important thing to note is that they also add that last bullet point is talking about two things that they have to consider when they're considering an expungement is the success of the probation, which is the part that is maybe open to interpretation still, and whether or not the petitioner has paid restitution or has the ability to pay restitution. So those are the two new criteria that we're looking at, especially with violations of probations. And the bill passed, hooray, thank you, Governor. It goes into effect October 1st of this year, so just a couple weeks from now. And it's really gonna, I mean, when we were preparing to back this bill, we were making lists of the clients that who specifically had a violation of probation that blocked other, not only blocked the violation conviction, but because it was a subsequent conviction on their record, it would also block the rest of their record. And it was just pages and pages of clients. It felt like a never-ending list. Like every time I had to do new case analysis for a client, I would be adding somebody new to the list. And it was really out of hand. It affects so many people. So this is a huge ruling, and a really big bill to pass. And we have our work cut out for us in terms of like helping our old clients who we have the ability to reach back out to. And if you're an attorney or if you're looking to file expungement for yourself, some things that you can do is to just go back through any things that were potentially ineligible, either due to driving without a license or violation of probation, and those things are obviously now eligible, so you can refile them. And then also, if anything was being blocked by either of those two cases, you can also file for those things now under this new bill as well.
And please keep us updated if you run into any issues. And I'm making a pitch too to any volunteer attorneys or any attorneys here in Maryland that might be interested in assisting. We do have a backlog, like Sylvia said. There's a lot of clients across numerous programs here at MVLS and at other organizations around the state that are going to be needing help with expungements now that Abhishek has been addressed through the governor's bill. And expungements are, I feel like they used to be a little easier to do. Now they're a little bit more complex. There's a little bit more complex analysis we have to do in looking at clients' records, but it's not a heavy lift to be able to help folks file a petition, but it can be it's a real help to the clients that are trying to get their records addressed. So if you're interested, you can reach out to MVLS and volunteer. Let us know you'd like to take an expungement case. You have expert guidance from folks like Sylvia and myself and our other attorneys and paralegal staff. And we're happy to help and mentor as we try to work through these cases and get folks the records cleaned up. So it's really exciting.
And this just goes over the new eligible convictions that were added. Originally, there were a lot more added, but by the time that the bill had passed, it was whittled down to just these three. But these are still three that we see pretty often, especially the driving without a license, 16101. I see it truly all the time. And yeah, it's been a huge barrier for expungement for a lot of people in all of my clients that I've been working with. And then cashing a bad check is another one that was added, both misdemeanor and to the felony levels. This one doesn't come up as often, but often enough that I've been able to see it, and it's been blocking some of my clients. And credit card theft, specifically stealing a card or knowingly using a stolen card, is now eligible. This one makes sense because there were a lot of other credit card theft charges that were eligible, but stealing a card and specifically knowing you're using a stolen card was not eligible. So this just kind of completes the circuit of what was eligible in terms of credit card theft. And all of the, sorry.
I was just gonna say that, some of these crimes that are now eligible, it's like for a lot of folks that I've seen have these charges on their records, that they were grappling with severe economic insecurity. And again, I'm not excusing the offense, right? But like having some understanding and like, again, the crime has been committed. If there's been a conviction, you've done your time. You know what I mean? It's great to be able to now address these and get these things off one's record.
Yeah, that's a good point too, especially with the violation of probation. It seems like people were getting like punished a second, third, fourth time for these violations of probations because you not only you serve your time, but then
Mhm.
you also have to serve more time,
Mhm.
potentially, or pay more fines, and then you're also not able to get anything expunged anymore. So hopefully these new eligible convictions, as well as the Abhishek overturning, will help people only be punished for the crime that they committed and nothing more, and hopefully able to help clear their records so they can learn and move on with their lives. And all of these go into effect pretty immediately. And there's not really any room for interpretation to not have it happen retroactively. So anything that was happened prior to October 1st that was previously ineligible is eligible after October 1st now too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sylvia. Yeah, it's really exciting. And again, if anyone has any questions about this, feel free to drop a line in the chat. And you can always reach out to us afterwards as well. I'm going to turn now just to a few other things that happened both in the governor's bill and then through the legislative session. Um, One additional thing that occurred with the governor's bill is there were some further changes made to Maryland judiciary case search. These changes are going to be going to effect a little bit later, not October 1st. They'll be happening on oh wait, not January 31st. I put the wrong date, January 1st, 2026. Basically what is going to be happening, there's been this trend over the last few years, that more and more is being hidden from public view through via the main like kind of publicly available database that we have in Maryland Judiciary Case Search. And before, years ago, you used to be able to see everything on Maryland Judiciary Case Search, which was, good and bad, right? You could find out a lot about people, but it was also, could be used to deny people things, employment, jobs. Like it's a tough thing. Like we want to have open information, but we also don't want folks to be, looking at a superficial official level at people's records and making decisions about their qualifications for things or whether they should be able to rent an apartment. So there's been a push to try and get less and less publicly available on case search, and particularly not having records showing where there wasn't a conviction. And so a few years ago, in 2021, there was legislation passed that made it so that any cases or charges where there was a null pros, acquittal, a not guilty or dismissal, they were hidden on case search. And now the new legislation passed via the governor's bill continues that trend, where if there was a charge or a case that resulted in a stat disposition, the stat is kind of like, I like to say it's when the prosecution takes a charge and puts it on the shelf for 3 years and says, we can take it down if we want to, but we're putting it away. If nothing else happens, and it'll not be eligible to move forward once 3 years has passed. So stats will no longer be visible, which is great. And then charges that were pardoned by Governor Moore's mass pardon in 2024, which include convictions or probation before judgments for cannabis possession or cannabis-related paraphernalia. Those will also no longer be visible on case search. So what's a little tricky about this though is I know when I talk to clients and to folks, just when I'm out and about doing community outreach, a lot of times people think that these charges have been expunged, and they have not been. They have just been hidden from public view on this one particular database, Maryland Judiciary Case Search. Folks still need to take action to get those charges, especially if they're past charges or conviction or past charges or records expunged. And this has caused a little bit of confusion. So I just want folks to understand when something is not appearing on case search, it doesn't mean that it's expunged. We have to do a little bit deeper of a dive with most of our clients, and we look at MDEC Smart Search, it's called, and sometimes other databases that we have access to be sure we're getting all the records that are out there and addressing them all if we can through expungement. Um, I do see a quick question. Volunteers who might be interested in taking on an expungement case, how long do those cases typically last from start to finish? That's an interesting question. I would say, I would say it depends on the number of cases. You know, if someone has under 10 records, it's usually not, or maybe 5 records. I don't know. So you can jump in here. I'd love to hear your opinion too. It's usually not too complicated of an analysis, and the petitions are pretty straightforward to fill out. They're one page. Sometimes there's one or two other additional documents you have to fill out. If there needs to be a fee waiver or a general waiver and release around liability. But the documents are pretty straightforward. So, you know, you have to get the records. Usually across most MVLS programs, we're like pulling the records and offering some analysis to our pro bono volunteers. So the volunteers need to, you know, do another review, prepare documents, meet with the client, and then submit the cases. I'd say that cases, once they're submitted to the court, sometimes they turn around in a month, sometimes it's 6 months. If there's any question from the court, they may call a hearing, though that's increasingly rare, I would say. But usually we do pretty good analysis and we know if something's eligible or not. Not much is open to interpretation. It's you look at the statute, you can tell yes or no. So I'd say anywhere from like 2 to 6 months, but with kind of a lot of waiting and not too much activity. What do you think, Sylvia? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I experienced too. Um, I mean, I go through expungements pretty quickly because it's a lot of what I do at my work. So I would say like the expungement part of it, there's some problem solving. So if you like problem solving, it's a great way to get some of that in, because you have to do what's a case analysis to see what's eligible and what's not eligible. And that could take, like you said, depending on how many cases, it could take anywhere from like an hour to maybe a week if you have like an extremely complicated one.
Mhm.
Um,
And
the
extremely
file,
complicated, I would say, if someone has like 20, 40 records, you know what I mean? Like a large
yeah,
amount of records.
uh,
So,
exactly. And then filing can take some time too. Only because, at least with Baltimore City, you can only file through the e-filing website. You're not allowed to file in person anymore. And the website can be really buggy, slow, laggy, and it can sometimes take a really long time to get through no fault of your own, just through the nature of the website. But then after that, like you said, it's really just a waiting game. Sometimes it goes really quick, the courts are on top of it pretty immediately. Sometimes things fall through the cracks and they have to wait a little bit longer.
yeah. And I'd say it's one of those things where once you do an expungement case, like the first one that you do, you're like, oh, this is, you know, I'm learning the law, I'm learning how to do the analysis. And again, we're here to provide guidance, review. I am happy to check folks' filings to discuss the analysis. I know our workforce team as well. Um, and you know, walk through the MDEC, the online filing process. But once you've done one, it's like, oh, I get this now. You know what I mean? And then it's easier to do future cases. And I know Sylvia and I and the rest of the team here, we churn through cases pretty quick. And you know, can probably recite um the various statutes off the top of our head or in our sleep now. So
True.
I see one other question. Won't disappearance of case search of charges in case search make it more difficult for people to access the information they'll need in order to file expungement because people lose or don't keep track of important paperwork? And yes, that is one of the downsides. Because case search is the primary publicly available database, that's where it's confusing. Because folks may have had uh you know, may have seen charges on there where all case was active, right? And then if things were null prost, if there was a stat, you know, and then stuff will disappear off case search and they think, oh, okay, it disappeared. It must have been expunged. Because, you know, understanding exactly how expungement works, it's not something like I would expect a non-legal person to know necessarily. So it does create some confusion. But that's why we're all here learning about this, things like this webinar. And putting folks in touch, again, MVLS has lots of ways that people can apply for help through our main line. There's lots of organizations out there, I mean, besides MVLS, Legal Aid, lots of our partners across Maryland that do expungements. There's clinics, there's community fairs, so folks can go and find out, work with an attorney to find out what might be on the record and then be able to take action. But yeah, it is creating a lot of confusion. We see that. Thanks for
Yeah,
the
I'd also
question.
like to add that the MDEC Smart Search is also a public facing record search. So
Mhm.
there is still a public way to view all of these things that are being removed from case search. But it is difficult to find for whatever reason. Like
Yeah.
if you Google MDEC Smart Search or Maryland Smart Search, you're going to get case search, which is the one that everything is being removed from.
Mhm.
So it makes it a little more difficult for the person who's filling out the expungements because they're harder to find. Smart search is pretty difficult to filter through. There's not a lot of options in terms of narrowing it down. So if you have somebody named John Smith and there's
Yes.
100,000 John Smiths, it's pretty difficult to parse through. But on the flip side of that, it also is hiding a bunch of things from case search, which is the most accessible
Mhm.
record search. And like if you're applying for housing, your landlords are most often using case search.
Yeah.
Um, so they won't see a lot of things
Yeah.
anymore that they shouldn't be
Which is
seeing because you
great,
weren't convicted.
yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if someone, we know sometimes when folks get charged with stuff, like they'll be charged with a whole host of things, like, the state's attorney will throw a lot of charges, right, initially, and then if none of those stick, right, or if one and then not these other more serious ones, don't go forward, like why should that be there for someone to view and make a judgment on? So I think it's good that this stuff is not out there and publicly available. But from a criminal record relief perspective, it does make things a little bit more complicated for folks. So, and I feel like at MVLS, like, we have access to some additional databases, Westlaw People Finder, like some different things that we can use, or we'll often be like layering our searches to make sure we've gotten everything. Because it can be tough to get through. I see another question. Will the slide deck be shared with the participants? Sure. Yeah, we can definitely send that out to everyone that registered for the webinar.
Also to answer the other question, there is a tool. I believe that it's on our website when you go to the expungement help section on our website.
Mm-hmm.
There's it only works on Google Chrome as far as I know. But
Mm-hmm.
it's just yeah, it's a little extension that when you're going through um, somebody's records, you can just add it into the extension. And then once you've got all of the things that you think are eligible, you just press the green button and it makes all the forms for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Is that just working off of case search though?
Yeah, it only works
Like,
on case search. So the more things that are removed from case search, the less effective it becomes. But it does give you a good idea of what the form should look like.
mhm,
And yeah, all of the forms look the same too. So once you fill out a couple of them, you'll really get the hang of it and it becomes
mhm.
kind of second nature.
No, it's a great, and again, it's almost like you have to look multiple places for like multiple things, but that tool, you can basically use that on any like convictions that are eligible, PBJs, stats, as long as they're there. And then, we'd gather the records, and you'd be able to just, fill out yourself, if you're an attorney working with a client, or if an individual just wants to file for exemption on themselves, by themselves, they can fill out the forms for any non-convictions that don't show up on case search. All right, I'm gonna keep moving. There was another piece of legislation that we wanted to highlight in terms of discussing expungement, because things that are also eligible for expungement are crimes that are no longer crimes. And every year in the General Assembly, it's pretty common for there to be um, uh, statutes repealed. laws that are now viewed as being unjust or unwarranted, or that are covered by different areas of the criminal code, then the prior laws are repealed. And there was legislation that repealed a law that basically prohibited the transmission of HIV. And we were, grateful to the folks that led the charge on this, Free State Judgment, Free State Justice, Trans Maryland, some other organizations, because this original law that was a number of decades old criminalized the transmission of HIV, but it was enacted because of really a lot of misinformation about disease treatment, about its spread and prevention, and it had a real discriminatory impact on the LGBTQ community here in Maryland. And it was part of a host of laws that were enacted about around the same time, targeting these communities. And so if anyone has been convicted of this, this law has now been repealed, and those kind of convictions will be eligible for expungement. And this follows a trajectory of there was repeals of prohibitions against consensual sodomy, a crime called perverted practice. And here at the HCPP, we've seen folks being targeted that were convicted of those crimes in relation to situations where they were being exploited and being trafficked. And so it was good to have some of these laws repealed too, because we don't want, folks being targeted in any way and having to face these situations when they were being victimized. So, all right, so just wanted to make people aware of that change. I also wanted to just have a quick reminder about automatic expungement. Automatic expungement is still relatively new. It's a process that was passed and went into effect here in Maryland through legislation that went into effect on October 1st, 2021. And it basically said that cases that have dispositions of not guilty, dismissals, acquittals, or null process are now going to be automatically expunged after 3 years. So again, I feel like there's this whole ecosystem of things going on with expungement that we have to wade through. And so more recent cases where it's a non-conviction with one of these 4 dispositions, cases where the dispositions were after this October 1st, 2021 date, people are not going to have to take any action on those cases technically. They are going to be automatically expunged by the state through an automatic process. And we've begun to see this. I've downloaded folks' records and then suddenly realized that the case was no longer there because the 3-year mark had passed and the case had disappeared from all court records and case search. It's been interesting to see happen. I just want to say that it doesn't happen to every single case. We've seen a few times where this hasn't happened. So it's just something to be aware of. I do want to remind people that as we move forward and as people have more recent cases that have these non-conviction dispositions, you don't have to wait for 3 years. Folks can expunge cases that have these not guilty, dismissal, acquittal, or null pros outcomes right after the close of the case. And they just have to file what's known as a general release and waiver that basically says that they are not going to sue the law enforcement agencies that were involved in the arrest or service or any proceedings in that particular matter. And there's a new court form that came out just at the beginning of this year that combines that request for expungement with the general waiver and release, so we can save some trees, which is nice. So we put a link to that in here. And one thing I also wanted to flag, though, is as we've been seeing these automatic expungements happening, we have also been noticing, though, that people are not getting notice. And I think one of the reasons is that, people move. Like, what's the last address on record with the court, right? Like, if any kind of notification or orders are going out based on that last address that was with the court from this case from a number of years ago, often it's not reaching the person. And so this is problematic because then the case is just kind of disappearing, but the folks have no record of like an order of expungement, no record around the case. For many people, this isn't going to be an issue. Okay, it's great. The case is off their record. It's been expunged. But for some folks, this could be hugely problematic. And so I just wanted to highlight, particularly for folks that are not US citizens, if they've had any encounters with law enforcement, especially recently, and there's a chance that these cases, would be eligible for automatic expungement, knowing that that is something that could happen, and getting copies of any of the records surrounding these cases is really important, because there can be issues down the road if you are trying to move forward with immigration proceedings, getting legal permanent residency, getting your citizenship. If records that are in the federal government database don't match records that are currently in state databases. And when things get expunged, things disappear, there's communications between different agencies, it can become a whole mess. And there's also different rules around like what you have to declare as to whether you've ever been arrested, ever convicted of a crime, that are a little bit different with immigration proceedings. Basically, we just want everyone to have copies of everything so that if there's ever any questions down the road, it doesn't become an issue. And you want to be able to consult with an immigration attorney and have all of these records in your possession. So I'm just flagging that because, again, I feel like there's all these aspects of expungement here in Maryland that are moving forward, which is great. Like, the remedies expanding, more offenses being eligible, automatic expungement rolling out. Now it's been, 3 years since this bill was passed. Things are moving. But it can create sometimes some unanticipated problems. And so we would just want to try to keep an eye on impacts that may occur that we may not be expecting. So. All right. We have a lot of resources on this on our website. We've produced many webinars, many tip sheets, flow charts, maps, instructions, step-by-step procedural outlines, how to use MDEC. Please feel free to visit our website to access any of these resources, and especially that wonderful online Chrome extension tool that Sylvia mentioned, which makes things a lot easier when you're trying to help people file and as an attorney, or if somebody's trying to file themselves, it's available to everybody. So, and we are also here. If you have any questions, want to talk further about this topic, it's something that a lot of us here at MVLS kind of live and breathe. We're in the criminal record relief space all the time with our clients, and we are happy to be a resource. So thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. And per usual, this webinar will be going up on MVLS's website, as well as the MVLS HTTP partnership resource page. So feel free to, if you missed a little bit of it or you want to view it again, feel free to do that, share it with anybody. Otherwise, we so appreciate having you here today. Thanks again.